We're good.
Hi, everyone. It's Thursday again. At least I think it is Thursday. The days seem to kind of flow from one end to the other. But another week has passed, and time for another conversations about COVID-19 and whatever else may come up with my colleague Jonathan Jerry. Minding everything behind the scenes is Emily Shore. And also joining us is Dr. Debbie, my daughter, who's an emergency physician and also practices ordinary medicine, but this time via telephone and visuals, whatever, and we're going to get Debbie to talk about that in a minute. But I thought that we needed a little bit of COVID diversion. So we're going to start with a little magic effect. Most of you have probably seen the illusion where you take a lady, put her in a box, and take out her middle. Well, that means that you have to carry around big equipment and you have to carry around big women. That's a challenge. So we're going to do this on a smaller scale. Instead of a lady, we will use my cigarette here, which we will put into this box, and lo and behold, we'll divide her into three. Now, the interesting thing is that we will just do this and restore her completely. All right, but there's actually a reason why I chose this particular little effect, and that is because I just want to mention cigarette smoke. You know that you can be in a room quite far from the smoker and you smell that smoke. In fact, you can even be outside close to a smoker and smell it, even not so close. Well, you know what? Those particles that are dispensed by a smoker are very, very, very small. And in fact, they can be smaller than a micron. We're talking the size of the coronavirus. So the reason I mention this is because the same way that cigarette smoke can spread quite an area, so can this virus. And the distance that we've talked about, the 6 feet, now turns out to be not quite so accurate, because that distance really was based on studies that were done in the 1930s, after the flu of the 1917, and they looked at large droplets, because in those days they were not able to examine what we now call aerosols. Aerosols are very, very tiny droplets, less than 1 micron, less than 1/millionth of a meter. So they didn't know in those days. They looked at the large drops, and in fact, they were able to show that those fell to the ground after about 6 feet. But now we're dealing with a situation that is quite different, because we know that there is spread further than 6 feet through aerosols. What is an aerosol? An aerosol just means that we're looking at very, very small particles. When we cough or we sneeze or talk or sing or yell at someone, we are releasing a lot of little droplets of all kinds of sizes, ranging from 100 microns to less than 1 micron. The large ones will indeed fall to the ground or onto your clothes or whatever pretty quickly. But the smaller ones stay in the air because they're air currents, especially where you have ventilation, like air conditioning. And this can push those particles all around. So now we know that there is a greater risk indoors than we thought that there was. And this really was highlighted by that classic example in the state of Washington, a little town called Mount Vernon, where a choir was in fact infected from one asymptomatic carrier. And there were 60 people there, and it was in a room size of the volleyball court, and they were distancing as much as possible. They didn't share books or anything like that. And 45 of these people were infected. So obviously the breath, propelled of course by the singing of the asymptomatic person, was able to infect people a lot further away. So there's a renewed interest now in aerosols and how this thing is being transmitted inside. And when we look at meatpacking plants, telephone answering centers, Amazon centers, prisons, hospitals, we are seeing transmission over significant distances. And this is probably happening through aerosols. Okay, well, with that little introduction, we'll get into further discussion of this. And first, we'll bring in Debbie because, as I said, hospitals. This is where aerosol transmission is possible. But anyway, how are things going in the hospital in terms of incidence of COVID?
So things have been pretty much stable. I mean, across the board at the MUHC, we've definitely we're having a decline in cases. So that's good. We reached the peak towards the end of April, and now everything seems to be declining. So that's definitely very good. I mean, we continue to get cases. Definitely, the aerosol it's concerning, and I think that the big risk amongst hospitals is actually proving to be amongst healthcare workers themselves, rather than from patients. Because when you go to see a patient, you're wearing the proper PPE, whereas when you're sitting around and talking with your coworkers, you're not. I mean, we're all wearing masks now, and we've been doing that for a few weeks already, but we're not wearing gowns, we're not wearing our visors, although I think that that's coming soon, is that it's going to be mandatory to wear visors as well in the hospital setting, like not when you're actually seeing patients. And we're all in such close quarters with each other. It's very, very difficult to maintain any form of physical distancing just because of the nature of our emergency room, because it's very small. So that's what's, really concerning when it comes down to patients. You know the risk when you go in and you prepare yourself and you don your gear properly and then you doff your gear properly. So it almost feels more risky sitting down and writing your notes.
Well, what happens when you're checking for hernia and you have to ask the patient to cough? You feel nervous about that?
I mean, so the patients have to wear masks as well. So you can't enter the hospital at this point if you without wearing a mask. And also every patient who enters the hospital is already asked a set, not just patients, any person that enters the hospital is asked a set of questions. So you know what you're dealing with. So I think if it's a patient who is in the hospital already, that means that they have answered no to all of the questions, because like I have mentioned before, we have tents set up. And so we really try our best to keep all of our COVID patients outside of the hospital. So if a patient's coming into the hospital, usually they're at least, at the very most, an asymptomatic carrier, and they're wearing a mask. And what choice do you have? I mean, you've got to, the problem I think with this is that we've gotten so focused in on COVID, and we have such blinders on almost. Well, there was a time when we had such blinders on it, and I think that medicine and healthcare was really suffering because everybody was just so afraid of COVID. And I think that, we've kind of come to the other side, fortunately, and realized that it's not just COVID, and, our regular patients are coming back, thank God, because, I mean, COVID is, it can be very boring. I mean, medically speaking, we miss the excitement of the other stuff, our regular bread and butter stuff. But so yeah, you get the patient to cough. I mean, listen, we take risks. That's what we do every day. So,
well, you open the news every day, and the talk is almost all the time about tracing and prospective vaccines, etc. So, Jonathan, where do we stand with the testing, tracing? What's new?
Well, I've certainly been looking into antibody testing kits. We hear about them quite a bit. This idea that, after a few days, often weeks, your body will develop antibodies against a coronavirus. And so if we can detect those antibodies, there's a good chance that you're now immune to the coronavirus. We don't know that for a fact. There's good preliminary evidence that points in that direction. We don't know how long the immunity would be for, but if we had this information, I think public health officials could make some interesting decisions as to who can go back into sort of riskier situations. But then if you're keeping up with the news about antibody kits, you also know that some people are claiming that they're no better than flipping a coin. They're just terrible. They're worthless. And The truth is it's somewhere in the middle. What's happening? I think it's important to think of it as a sort of a new gold rush. There's a huge demand for these kinds of testing kits, and so there are companies that have zero experience making medical equipment that are deciding to just jump on the bandwagon and start making these kits. And some of these kits have been independently tested, and sure enough, they're just terrible. And in the U.S., they had the situation where the Food and Drug Administration allowed virtually any company to sell these kits without going through a proper approval process. Health Canada is very different. They have a rigorous approval process. They've only approved 2 kits so far. So now the U.S. has to sort of roll back this free-for-all that they let happen for a little while. So some of these kits are terrible. Other kits are very, very good. But even if a particular kit has a very high specificity and sensitivity, meaning that if you don't have antibodies, it will tell you don't have antibodies, and if you do have antibodies, it will tell you that you do. The accuracy of your own personal result will vary depending on how common antibodies are in the population. And I wrote about this. My article is going to come out on Saturday, and I did a bit of math with this to show that if a very, very small percentage of the population has antibodies against the coronavirus, and you get a positive result using one of these kits, it may have a 50% accuracy. But the more people have antibodies against a disease, the more accurate your positive result will be. So the bottom line is that these kits are very useful, but they are not perfect. And it's not just because it's an antibody testing kit. Any sort of diagnostic or screening test has these challenges with it, these issues, which is also why, this idea of mass screening people against cancer indiscriminately, it's not as ideal as you would think that it would be, because you're going to get a lot of false positives. So that's, in a nutshell, what's happening with these particular kits.
Well, summer has hit, and yesterday here in Montreal, we had temperature of over 33 degrees, which is quite unusual for May. And of course, this has brought up all kinds of questions about swimming pools, beaches, being outdoors, air conditioning systems, and what risks they pose. As a general rule, being outside, of course, is far less risky than being inside. There's no question about that. In terms of swimming, the water does not present any kind of risk. Any virus that gets into the water gets diluted immediately. And furthermore, you have to remember that this is a respiratory virus, not an enterovirus, so that even if you swallow some, that's not the issue. What you have to be careful with is that when you're splashing around in the pool, you don't get too close to other people. So it's the same idea as with anything else. You have to keep your distance, because unfortunately, you don't know who is infected. And this is the kind of scary part, is the asymptomatic transmission. And it's kind of unnerving when you go out for a walk and you're walking along the sidewalk and someone else comes in the opposite direction, and then they go off into the street as if you were a leper, going around you. It's all understandable, but it is still, I find it somewhat unnerving, especially because outdoors, I think the risk of being in contact with enough virus to cause an infection is extremely, extremely small. One thing we have to remember, that thinking about infection with the virus is very much like thinking about toxicity with a chemical. It is always a question of the particular hazard that chemical has in terms of its innate property and our exposure to it. So the risk is a product of the innate danger and the exposure. Well, here, of course, the virus presents an innate danger, but it's also a question of how many viral particles we're exposed to and for how long. And passing someone by, even if they're running, even if they're exhaling a lot, you are not going to inhale enough of the viral particles to be infected. If you stop and chat with someone and the distance is very close, then, of course, that's a picture for infection. Now, what about indoors? Air conditioning, for example. A lot of people are asking about that. We do have some evidence here from 2 places. One is from the Diamond Princess. That is the cruise liner that was quarantined for over 14 days off the coast of Japan. And the other is from a relatively large restaurant in China. At that restaurant, there were a number of people who became infected with the virus, and they were able to trace it to one asymptomatic transmitter who was sitting at one table. And there were people who were affected sitting many tables away. And it turns out that the air conditioning system was such that the air was blowing from behind this person towards all the other tables. And they were a lot further than 6 feet away. However, we also have to realize that they were sitting there for a long period of time, inhaling the virus. So it was not instantaneous. The Diamond Princess is a very interesting story because there were some 600 people on that ship who became infected. However, after the quarantine was put into place and people were made to stay in their rooms, basically prisoners in their rooms, and some of those, of course, didn't even have outside view. After that, there were no infections among the people who were locked in their rooms, except if they happened to be in with someone who already had been infected. So there were no new infections, which means that there was no transmission through the ventilation system. I think Jonathan had a fire alarm there. So there was no infection through the ventilation system, and air samples from ventilation system showed no presence of virus. Now, when you're living in a building here, let's say in a condo, the ventilation system is such that it actually sucks air out. There's some air pumped in, but it's also sucked out. So it's very unlikely that there's going to be any kind of transfer through the ventilation system. And if you have an air conditioner in the window, that of course is pulling in air from the outside, and you're not likely to have any virus there. So we are left with the situation that it is indoor environment where you have a lot of people, where you don't have a lot of circulating air. That's what causes these infections. Wow. Churches, religious ceremonies, those have been prisons. These are the hotbeds.
What about, someone has a comment here on Facebook, our friend Terry Polvoy.
Looks like Jonathan has put out the fire.
Hello, yes, sorry, there was a fire alarm in my building and it just stopped, so I think it was a false alarm.
They're usually all false alarms.
We thought that you had put it up.
Yeah. But here, Terry Polvoy has a question. Closed spaces for sure pose more danger, but what about hair salons? Where a lot of what they do is blowing air on people via hair dryers.
Hair salons, I think, are a real problem. Even if the customer wears a mask and the hairdresser wears a mask, because you're in very close contact. It's hard to do hairdressing 6 feet away. You have to have very long scissors, so that's not going to happen. And you are, in fact, exchanging air even when you're wearing masks. So I think that is taking a risk. Terry, we should tell people, Terry Polvoy is a quack fighter like we are as well. He's an MD, and he posts a lot of interesting stuff. And he also sent me today a video of a chef, I think it was in California, who was making bagels and was teaching people how to make bagels. I found this very disturbing. Being in Montreal, of course, we live here in the what can I tell you? This is the mecca of bageldom. This is really where bagels in North America started. We have the best bagels, and I can tell you this as a fact, because we have actually done, through the Montreal Gazette, we have actually done proper controlled trials of this, where we sent bagels to tasters in Hamilton and to tasters in New York, and they sent their bagels to us in exchange. Nobody knew which ones they were tasting, and it was no question. The results were overwhelming. Montreal bagels were the best. But now we have this chef at home in his kitchen telling people how to make bagel. And he seemed to be doing it along the right lines, making the dough, boiling the dough. Without tasting it, of course, I can't come to any conclusion. But I find it to be frightening that someone is making bagels at home in their kitchen.
People are making everything right now in their kitchen.
Yeah, you need a proper wood fire in order to make a proper bagel, and you need proper Montreal water to do it.
We have a couple more questions here, but I could talk about bagels forever.
That I just did is going to raise a lot more questions and a lot more comments than anything that we have said about COVID up to now.
Yeah, I could talk about bagels forever, actually. But there's two good questions here. Just the quick follow up. You talked about hair salons. Someone asked about gyms. Someone says, and what about gyms? We're all using the same equipment. I can't weigh in expertly, but I just got a very interesting email from Barry's Boot Camp, which is, it's not in Montreal, but it's in various cities here in Canada and in the States. And it is, there's tons of treadmills, there's floor, you switch back and forth between treadmills and floor. It's a heavy duty operation. And I just got a very interesting email talking about all their COVID procedures that they're going to be implementing. And I actually took screenshots and sent it to my friends, and everyone was saying, this is pretty crazy. It was very impressive. I just don't know how something actually, I'm curious to see how that will play out. It involved contactless temperature checks for when you walk in. You have to register in advance, obviously, for the class, which you had to do anyway. When you get there, you have to call, then you are allowed to enter. They have half the capacity in that room and for the treadmills and the floor, and you're always going to stick to the same treadmill and floor. There's no more switching. You can't, locker rooms are only for hand washing or going to the washroom. And yeah, that was kind of the beginning of the gym opening.
I think gyms are a problem, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. Actually, this is something I want to ask Debbie. The business about checking temperature. Mm-hmm. How reliable is that? Because if you're asymptomatic and you're a carrier, you're not likely to have a temperature.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't know how effective these kinds of thermometers that they're using are, because really the best way to check a temperature, sorry to say, is a rectal thermometer.
Right.
And it's true. It's true. I mean, it's the truth, because there's many ways to change the temperature.
I can tell you that was not in the Barry's email. And there was no visuals
you get
associated with
many
that.
fewer subscribers of that gym.
Yeah, that's a way to cut off a Barry subscription right there. Yeah.
Yeah. So A, I don't know how effective they are, and B, I mean, you're absolutely right. If you're an asymptomatic carrier, it's very unlikely that you'll have a temperature. And then C, I mean, you may be infected and not be febrile. There's definitely different people mount different kinds of immune responses to different viruses, and I mean, but with that being said, I think it's relatively harmless, and I can say that I have picked up temperatures in patients coming into the hospital who didn't think that they had a temperature. I don't know about you, but I mean, I can tell when I have a temperature. I don't really need to take my temperature to tell, but I guess some people don't have that innate superpower.
I also just find the whole, even going into the SAQ here, and again at Barry's also, they said they're gonna, do you have symptoms? Do you feel sick? No, and they kind of let you in, and I even answer just being like, no, I'm good. But the whole point of asymptomatic is that I could be fine now and feel fine. It's just in 14 days. So I find some of those questions.
At the very least, they keep out the people that are acutely sick. Although the truth is, I mean, they ask those same questions going into the hospital, and it's very, people can lie, and people have lied in the past, and we've been very upset about that in the past, and we've kind of had to come out and say, listen, you can't lie about these things, but I'm sure people continue to do that. But at the very least, it's something, and you feel like you're doing something. And we got an email from my daycare that they were going to be doing temperature checks as well. Some daycares are even doing temperature checks every 2 hours, that to me seems ridiculous. But whatever you have to do to feel in control.
A couple times this week, because with the good weather, people could drive around and travel, and they're worried about having to stop at public toilets on the way. It's an interesting issue. because there have been stories about how when you flush the toilet, you aerosolize some of the fecal matter that may be in the toilet, and viruses, or at least remnants of viruses, have been detected in fecal matter. But so far, I've not come across any case where they've been able to trace that to toilets. Obviously, it's a good idea to close the lid on the toilet when you flush. But in many cases, there are no lids. Like in the hospital, Debbie, I don't know, are there lids on the toilets?
No.
There is not, right? So that can be an issue. But again, what we have to remember is the time frame, is that you have to be inhaling the viral particles for some time in order to be infected. So I think if you're traveling and you have to stop and to go to the toilet at Tim Hortons, which is what most people do, you don't go in there with your book and you don't sit there and read. You go and get your business done and get out of there and wash your hands. I think that you have to be reasonable about these things. I mean, you do your best, but you can't totally eliminate risk, no matter what you do. Then there are questions about backyard barbecues and inviting people. Again, outdoors, the risk is very small. And as long as you don't go kissy, kissy, huggy, huggy, and you stay a respectable distance away, especially with family members or friends who have been taking proper care of yourself, I don't see big risk there.
There's the communal aspect, though, of a barbecue. I mean, no one's going to be putting their hands in the same bowl with chips and nuts and everything. I mean, I think that's...
But maybe a moratorium on kiss the cook aprons.
Right.
Yeah, I think so.
And no double dipping.
I think so.
No double dipping.
And yeah, you don't want to pass the peanuts around, same way.
One of my friends has a question that she's concerned about, and I've heard these kinds of questions before. People, as the deconfinement happens, and people are starting to go back to work. So, for example, some professions are obviously, like we've already discussed, more at risk than others, like hairdressers, for example. So she happens to be a psychologist, and so she's concerned about the risk of sitting, one-on-one for a prolonged period of time with her patients who are often crying and, blowing their nose, and so she's concerned about the risk of that. And I think it's a reasonable concern, because 1 hour is a prolonged period of time. And she's right that, I think that the kind of the moral of the story is that the grosser that people are, like the more gross you get, the more boogery and mucusy that you get, definitely that will increase your risk. So I think that it's a valid concern. And I wonder about if, I'm continuing to practice telemedicine as much as I can. And I happen to think that psychologists should fall in the same category. I actually think that the risk might even be higher because they're spending so much time with the patient. Client.
Yeah, and I would think that would be relatively easy to do by telemedicine. Anyway, bringing up this topic of telemedicine, maybe, explain to people just what that is and what you have had to resort to.
Yeah, so it's a really interesting way of functioning. I mean, I guess I did some training, like, in residency, we would do some version of telemedicine when I would do my electives up north, like in Chisasibi. Basically, the way that it's working in my family medicine clinic, up until now, we've been only doing telemedicine. We haven't been seeing any physical patients in our clinic. So basically, I'm calling my patients and speaking to them over the phone. I have had video consults as well, if there's something that I feel that I need to see. And I've actually been surprised as to how far I can get by speaking to them on the phone, and I can solve a lot of problems just by talking. It's a little bit frustrating, obviously, because it does take more time. Your eyes are very helpful. The physical exam aspect. I mean, patients don't realize this, but so much of my impression and plan will actually just come from me watching a patient, watching the way that they're speaking. Are they sweating? Are they breathing fast? So there's a lot that we're missing, obviously, like that. But, for many issues, I'm able to manage it. I'm faxing a lot of prescriptions directly to the pharmacies, and I'm emailing lab requisitions and x-ray requisitions and things like that. So, I welcome patients to call their family doctors and see what kind of telemedicine they're doing. If a patient does need to be seen in person, we have these cold and hot clinics that are set up. So the hot clinics are for patients who have been previously assessed by a doctor and have been deemed to be at risk of COVID. So they get, triage specialists to a particular clinic where the doctors and the nurses have the proper gear to protect themselves. And then the cold clinics are clinics where you've kind of pre-screened the patient and you don't feel that they have any risk. And so they can go see a physician there without much protective gear. So it's going well. It's going well. We're gradually starting to reopen our clinic in the month of June, but we're planning on continuing telemedicine as much as we can, and basically only booking in patients for physical exams when it's necessary. Obviously there are some things that you can't do over the phone. You can't do a pap test over the phone. You can't check someone's blood pressure over the phone. Things like that.
Yeah, well, people can learn to do their blood pressure testing at home, right? They can buy the kit and do it.
Yeah, and a lot of people do that already, but there definitely are, babies need to be assessed properly. They need to be examined. Babies need their vaccines. Women need their pap tests. So, there's certain things that definitely need to be done in person. And it is hard to assess a patient, with a respiratory illness over the phone. It's pretty much, the physical exam is really helpful in that sense.
I had a question from someone who had one of these lawn parties this week and invited some family members over and was in a quandary about allowing one of the gentlemen into the house to go to the bathroom. And she was asking whether or not she should make him pee outdoors.
You're laughing, but I did this last week. I did not go into my cousin's house.
I said, just let him in and hope that his aim is good. But in any case, you do not catch it like that. The virus isn't passed through the urine. And the amount of breathing that he's going to do.
It does, actually. Actually, this particular coronavirus has been detected in urine.
Oh, it's detected, but it hasn't infected. There's no infection.
Well, so there's one study. Bear that in mind. One study.
There's always one study.
One study of one patient whose urine was positive for the coronavirus, and they used that urine, and they managed to successfully infect cells in a petri dish in the lab with it.
So
and there are cases from
in the person's pee. Don't go swimming in the person's
exactly.
pee.
But there was a case in China during SARS where over 300 inhabitants of a particular building got infected, presumably because of faulty sewage lines that were aerosolizing feces and urine that had the virus. So the virus is not the urine is not virus free, but indeed, like the odds of you catching it from somebody's urine, just don't go, putting urine in your face.
That was a very interesting story, the SARS story at that time in China. And they actually traced it to one of the occupants in one of the apartments having played around with the exhaust system that was attached to the sewage system. Because sewage systems, of course, are also linked to an exhaust system that goes to the roof. And for some reason, he manipulated this and left an opening. And that is where it got into the apartment. So,
I see.
it can happen in the most unusual ways. That's the thing about these viruses. You don't see them, so you don't know where they are going. People have asked about going camping and sleeping in tents. Well, I guess you got to know who you're sleeping in that tent with and what their history is. But I don't think it's any different from being in a room with someone. But as a general outdoors, the risk is much less.
Can we go? We have some good questions here. And
Okay.
okay, so one is, well, basically, Joe, we've spoken a lot about this, and this is the building director of the Stewart Biology building at McGill, saying that they're thinking about now air dryers versus paper towels. And this is a conversation we have in our office, or we used to have in our office when we were congregating in our office all the time, because buildings at McGill don't have paper towel and they only have hand dryers. So she wants to know, is one better than the other and why? So please.
I think now we can pretty categorically say yes, because the studies have been done. Paper is better. The dryers can accumulate, not necessarily this virus, but they can accumulate bacteria inside because they're moist inside and they're warm. And that's the temperature that bacteria require to multiply. So they can spew out all kinds of microbes. Plus, of course, they also cause air movement. And in the bathroom, if there's anything to the fecal and urine business, then blowing air around is going to aerosolize it even more. So I think that paper towels are the best, and of course you also have to have a way of disposing of them. But
and another advantage of paper towels is that once you're done washing your hands, if you just go back and turn off the faucets with your hands, you can recontaminate your skin.
Yeah.
Whereas with the paper towels, you can use a paper towel to do that and also to open the door on your way out.
Also, it's important to realize that drying the hands is important because microbes love moisture and they love heat. And if you leave your hands wet and you have left some bacteria or some virus on there, there's a greater chance of multiplication.
Someone said, how about an air dryer equipped with light, like the UV light?
Yeah, well, there are those. And if they have the right wavelength of UV light, it has to be UVC, very specific, 622 nanometers. That should work. But I don't know if anyone tests those things. I mean, certainly UV works. And now there are these automatic UV disinfectant contraptions that they're using in subways. They're using it in buses. They're using it in hospitals. They're using it in surgical theaters, and they're robots. It's really interesting to see these, and you can go online and watch the videos of these things, and they just go around, they maneuver, they blast everything with the ultraviolet light, and of course the microbes have to be in the path of the light, right? But yeah, these things work.
So we also, restaurants are starting to open up. A lot of them are looking more to outdoor spaces. I think that's also going to change, people's thinking of inhabiting space. I think a lot will be moving outdoors. Unfortunately, we have a terrible climate for that for 6 months, 8 months of the year. But there's a question because I know that soon restaurants are going to be moving into almost a phase 2, which I don't know what that is, but it's supposed to be sometime in June, I think. So someone asks about air circulation. Just again, we're talking about it in restaurants. And once they open, and even if we distance, should you be wary of that?
Sure. There's an issue there because if the air circulation is such that they're not sucking in enough outdoor air, and they're just recirculating the air inside, that could be a problem. But the biggest problem for restaurants, as I understand it, for having spoken to some restaurateurs, is that restaurants financially cannot survive with 50% of the business. So if they're going to be mandated to have 50% occupancy, they just can't do that unless they double the prices. So that's
unless they get a huge uptick in takeouts and deliveries.
Yeah. I think the restaurants right now that are doing the takeout are surviving. But I think the term is surviving. I don't think that they're making big money.
Well, a lot of the overhead is lower.
Yeah.
Right? But I'm not sure that translates into a Saturday night,
Yeah. Any indoor environment can be a problem. We saw, this last weekend in the U.S., Memorial Day weekend, and we all saw the videos of what was going on there, right? You had swimming pools packed wall to wall with people. In one of those pools, these people now are already being asked to self-quarantine because someone in the pool was infected. There were bars and it was like total normal, no distancing whatsoever. It's going to be interesting to see what happens, if there's any consequence of this, if we're going to see a spike because of this activity that was experienced over the weekend. It's going to be interesting.
Emily, make sure to read Vicky's question.
Vicky's question.
Read what?
Yeah, Vicky wrote a very good question to Emily.
Which one? I can't even say. What did it say?
Just above Shirley.
What?
All right, I'll read it out.
You read it.
So Vicky asks, Emily, is there a video of you peeing in your cousin's garden?
I did. That was one comment that I missed. There's no, there's no video of that I'm aware of. No.
There's cameras everywhere.
It's true. I could ask her if they have cameras. That's true. But there is another. There was a question here that I was looking at. About masks, and I talked about this. We said how the masks are like the new fuzzy dice, on the
fuzzy dice, yeah,
on the mirror. So someone says they've been leaving their masks in the car with the windows up, with the idea that they're getting sanitized due to the heat in the car. Is there any validity to this?
I don't think anyone has tested that. But
it's funny.
They have tested is that if you take the mask and you leave it for a couple of days in a paper bag, you can't detect any virus, any active virus.
That's just time. That's time. But
time.
We know that the sunlight does. So
sunlight is
sunlight does.
The UVC component of sunlight will
Does the sunlight get it through the car window?
No, UV does not go through the car window.
Yeah, so you gotta leave it outside. You gotta hang it on your antenna.
Holding the mask outside.
That's going to be the new thing on the antenna of the car.
Yeah.
I mean, this business with the mask. I mean, you see it in the U.S. I mean, some of the really frightening things. There are some places that have put out a sign, "Not allowed in with a mask." These people are crazy. Yeah.
Where is that?
Somewhere in
certain stores, with a right-wing leaning mentality of libertarianism and masks for sissies and those kinds of ideas.
It's frustrating. We have another question. Just moving to testing again. The diagnostic and the antibody, two different ones. What should we be focusing on one more than the other, and what degree of confidence do you have in the diagnostic testing?
Well, we have to use. I mean, both tests are used for different purposes, right? So the swab that goes up your nose and that is sent to the lab to test for the genetic material of the virus, that diagnostic test is to know if you have the virus or not presently. The antibody test is, did you have the virus in the past? Were you infected, and did you mount an immune response? Can we detect antibodies against the virus? So different tests have different purposes. No test is perfect. Every test always has a false positive and a false negative sort of percentage. So, I mean, that's why in some cases they will repeat the test multiple times to make sure that the result is always the same. But that's true of any test. Like, no test is perfect. There are always reasons why a test is imperfect. So they have their place, provided that the kits that have been approved work really well. Even if they're good tests, they will, in quotation marks, they will lie, a few times here and there because of that. So, so they have their purpose, but they're not perfect.
Well, Trump, of course, keeps talking about how many more tests they're doing every day, but never talks about which tests, and what the results are. It's just a lot of empty talk there. And now, of course, with his refusal to wear the mask in public, he's just fueling all of this anti-mask movement. It's really a ridiculous business what is happening down there.
Wasn't he supposed to be tested like every day? Do you really think that they're shoving a Q-tip up his nose? Because I doubt it.
One can only hope.
I don't understand how he's the only one that has not caught it. Like, it feels like he really doesn't care. He doesn't take care of himself, and he seems to be like the Lex Luthor.
It is because he took the hydroxychloroquine that he's protected. right?
Right.
The hydroxychloroquine issue basically is passé, because there's just, there's enough evidence that it just doesn't work. Whether or not it's really harmful, that isn't that clear. Probably is, but it hasn't saved anyone from dying. Unfortunately, I mean, it would have been great if it worked, but it just it hasn't.
Can we ask one more face mask question that maybe Debbie can answer? There's a lot of questions about them, obviously, because now also we can buy them anywhere. And again, whether it's hanging on the mirror, blowing AC, blowing the virus around, we are getting a lot of questions. But how often should the cloth masks be washed? Like if I wear mine out and I'm going to the bank for a half hour and then I come back, I mean, do I need to put it in the wash right away? Can I hang it up somewhere in my apartment to dry for a few hours or a day? Do I need to put it in the wash right away?
I would just wash it or hang it out outside in the sunlight.
You can also hand wash it. Like you don't need to put this in a washing machine.
That's true.
Soap and water, but why not? Yeah, and also
you can have more than one.
You don't need to wear the mask at all times. Like I think we've talked about this before, but if you're biking or you're jogging, please don't wear a mask. You're going to dehydrate yourself.
In New York they they have to.
Do not. No, well, but do not. I mean, that is so silly. And you really should only be wearing a mask when you can't maintain physical distancing. So if you're going to enclosed spaces and you can't be more than the 2 meters apart, then you should be wearing a mask then, but definitely not, and especially not in this weather outside.
Mommy. Debbie, I'm looking forward to wearing the duck mask. Where is it?
It's coming. I think it's coming tomorrow. It should be ready for you by next Thursday.
Can I?
Okay.
You want to ask? We have one more question. Someone asked it twice, so maybe we could just finish on that one.
Okay.
That there's been. Oh, hi, boys. There's been several studies and in also prestigious journals that a significant amount of people may have a T-cell immunity to COVID-19 because of past exposures to other coronaviruses, and they'll never be infected or even develop antibodies if exposed to the virus. Can someone comment on that?
Well, I think this has been examined. I've looked at a couple of the papers that have been published on that, and there doesn't seem to be anything there in terms of being protected. I don't know, Jonathan, if you've seen anything, but
it's the first time that I hear of this, so I don't know. I just want to say that, Debbie, your children look like they're part of the witness protection program because their faces are blurred out.
They're all blurred.
Yes.
No, unfortunately, I haven't heard anything. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Because you focused the camera on just you? How did you do that?
Yeah, you press
There's
blur.
a setting on Skype where you can blur your background, but it only looks for one face, so any other faces get blurred out.
Yeah.
So, why don't you unblur it so we can see them?
There we go.
There we go.
There we go. All right, Jonathan.
We're also on mute so that you don't have to deal with what I deal with on a daily basis.
On that note.
Okay, we explored all avenues today. We talked about peeing outdoors instead of peeing indoors. I don't think it makes much difference, but we also understand that Emily has a different view on that. We emphasize the fact that indoor is the problem. Outdoor, you don't have to worry so much. And the summer is here. We can be outdoors a lot. We can be barbecuing. I probably need to worry more about burning the hamburger on the barbecue and ingesting all the hydrocarbons from there that are carcinogenic than about the coronavirus. All right, there will be more to talk about by next week for sure. And we're going to do that again on Thursday. I'm not exactly sure what time we will do it because we may have our other special guest back, my son-in-law in Israel, who's an emergency room doctor there. And we may have to accommodate his time so that he doesn't have to get up in the middle of the night. Right. So we have to do it a little bit earlier. Okay, that's it. Keep well, go outside, and enjoy the summer. The virus is lurking around, but don't let it spoil your life.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.